So yeah, I did not pick up on that at all. Like there were parts where like I kept thinking like maybe there's a string here that I should be looking to. Like maybe I can figure this out on my own. But also like, and this has always been a problem with me, especially for play-by-post, where I will end up putting way too much mental energy into it. So I was like, well, maybe I'll figure this out, maybe I won't. And like Zeke was also a very low mental attribute type. He was not really somebody who's going to be doing a ton of like thinking about stuff. He was in the game system we were using, they don't use intelligence, they use logic. He was a logic 1 character.
Yeah. It came up a couple of times that the neat thing about playing Zeke is that you don't need to know anything more than a lazy teenager.
Yeah. Well, the nice
But,
thing
he
about
was
having
simultaneously
was
very
after
different from you, but well, yeah, he was very different from you, and yet, yeah.
There were parts of it where like, I wonder if me playing Zeke is giving an entirely wrong impression of the type of person I am. Because Zeke is so different from who I am, like pretty much across the board, that it was like, is he gonna end up? Because I would just do like, I would not, like a lot of times instead of like actually sitting down and planning out an option, I just like, all right, I'll just do the first thing that comes to mind, because that's what this impulsive 17-year-old would do. Like I'm usually much more of I would think stuff out and not go for the most aggressive. But part of what
But
happened,
yeah,
so,
I mean, I did kind of wonder sometimes about just how much you had in common with Zeke. But like, especially because early on, again, when I barely knew you, but as we started getting deeper and deeper into it, it became pretty obvious that there were some differences here. Especially because, like, Zeke got noticeably more aggressive after the first couple of sessions, which made it fairly obvious, yeah, there's someone who is fleshing out a character who is a lot more impulsive and heedless of consequences than he is himself. And so he's sort of like, getting into that headspace as he plays the character, which is, something that I've, since again, this was like pretty much the very first game that I'd run professionally, but I had, of course, run and played in tons of games before that as a normal volunteer. And so I had seen that kind of thing happen a lot, so, and I'd done it a couple of times myself.
Well, not even the next game I played with Canamille, that happened with a character. It took me a couple sessions to get into her headspace. So Zeke refuses to do this, to kill this person, and then Mr. Spooky goes and has both his parents killed, which it was a powerful moment. Like, it was a good moment, but it also meant, like, any mundane concerns had to be gone. So even, like, the stuff of, like, being in the closet, like, that is important, but in the meantime, I have a guy trying to kill me and my friends, family members,
right,
for not having cooperated with him. So that kind of got consumed.
This is the place I feel where, like, this is the biggest scar of having built this, and I kept hoping that I would be able to get ahead of it, but I never was. This was the biggest scar of having built this 1 week at a time, instead of stepping back, taking a month to really plan things out, and then having a long-term arc planned. Arc is probably the wrong word, because arc, you think character arc, but having a long-term situation planned is that one thing. Had I been planning things out, as a huge arc, I would have very quickly realized I need to leave room for things to continue to escalate. Planning things out 1 week at a time, all I was really focused on was, this particular scene is amazing, which it was, but, like, I was constantly painting myself into a corner this way.
And it never, and because also, like, that meant there could be no more conflict with the parents. That was something that was gone because they're dead. What is it? Is this a can of something?
No idea.
Also, Cam, I've noticed that all of your veins have turned black. Like, I can see them through your skin.
let's talk about Calvin. Calvin was a fun character.
Oh, that was like the after like the intro. I think took like 1 or 2 sessions. That might have been like the fourth session. Like, well, let me check my notes. This is like session 3 or 4. So Zeke is his first mission for Supernatural Society is helping curry something from one place to the other, acting essentially as the driver's bodyguard. And the driver was Calvin, who he clicks with just at an amazing level. Like, Calvin, as I think we mentioned, is Amigo, which is a swarm of bugs wearing a human skin.
Yeah, and like his whole thing is that he was a supernatural courier. He was a really good driver. He was, he could be trusted to curry things from one place to another, and he was part of like a sort of an organization that was kind of, saying they were dedicated to this is an oversimplification, but like so far as their presence in the plot was concerned, they were a courier group, and he was their actual courier who drove things from one place to another. The rest of them were mainly involved in things like other functions of the organization, or they would. Some of them were the typical muscle, but because they were not, they were stretched a little bit thin, and so they brought in Zeke. So Calvin's whole thing is driving, which during the climax of this arc, there was naturally a car chase involved, and there's 2 stories to tell here, but I'm going to go with the first one first. Is that if you've ever heard the song Gas, 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 if you haven't, look it up on YouTube. It's a fantastic driving song. It's really high energy, so 80s. And I forget the details because this is actually your story, but go ahead and tell it about the...
Oh, running into it again?
Yes.
Yeah, so I went, and this is in the before times, back when you could go and do games in person. I went, and there was a pickup game of Monster Hearts, and naturally I played a werewolf, I guess? And the very end of the session we did ended up me in a car race with this other character, and the GM pulls out her phone and starts playing Gas, Gas, Gas. And I was like, how does this keep happening?
So, yeah. There's that. And then there's also the time where there was the climax that wasn't, because... So it's a dice pool based game. Same basic deal as Old World Darkness. You roll a big old pile of dice. You count up how many are X number or higher. That's how many successes you have, how many hits you get, whatever you want to call it. There's, squiggly little mechanical differences, but they don't matter. The main takeaway is that Calvin gets, on average, 5 hits on any given driving roll, because like he is extremely good at this, like hyper specialized into it.
And 5 hits is very good for...
Yeah, like five hits is like, an amazing result. It's about as high as you can get. Obviously, in theory, you can get like 15 hits if you just roll the maximum value on every single die. But he gets 0 hits on this driving check, right? Like, he's trying to outrun. There's some basic mooks. I'm ramping up to the climax here, right? So there's some basic mooks following Zeke and all the rest of the most of the rest of the Laughter Factory, because they're going to pick one of their members up. When some of the bad guys start chasing around, the Laughter Factory is this courier organization, and so, they're getting like 2-3 hits. I conservatively have Calvin aim for 4 hits on a driving stunt in order to outpace them, so if he gets at least 4 hits, he's away. If he gets less than that, then he has screwed up somehow. And he gets to pick how risky he wants to drive, but he also has to get more than the other guys do. It's a bit of a complex system. What matters is that 4 hits should have been easy for him, and he instead got 0, which means he failed in a massive way. he just immediately wipes out, turns the entire car over. Everyone is like half dead and struggling to use whatever kind of supernatural healing they have access to. It was just...
Well, here's the other thing. First of all, you essentially did a coin if I was going to ground. So it was 50-50 chance I wouldn't be, but of course I was. And then, since he is a werewolf, even in human form, he's got amazing soak. He should be able to take the damage. And I think I got 0 successes on my soak roll, so I took the full damage.
So yeah, so he has been, like, crushed. Now, I wasn't planning on using it this early, but I did have a backup plan for how to get Zeke out of this alive, just in case, because this was my first big, huge boss fight, and I wanted to make sure I had a way of getting Zeke out alive, just in case he wound up critically injured and bleeding out. Like, you know, if the boss jacked him up real bad, he could, someone, you know, the rest of the Laughter Factory, even just one person only had to survive, could drag him away from it and feed him, I forget what it was, I think it was vampire blood, some kind of special blood that would instantly give him a bunch of his power points back that he could use to activate his powers that would keep him alive. But instead, we bust that out in, like, the first 10 minutes. Because of these 2 catastrophic failures. You said that you actually Googled whether or not it was possible for the GM in Roll20 to force a roll to get a certain result.
Yeah.
Didn't you? Yeah? You can't, by the way.
Because,
This just happened.
There's some play-by-post stuff where the GM has the ability to make whatever they want and cheat the roll. And I was like, did he do that on purpose?
Yeah, no, I mean, this actually completely threw my plans off track for, you know, I had a pace to the session I was planning on, and the dice just entirely fucked me immediately. It all worked out for the best, though. Everyone got away alive. I was able to build up to a different climax in a different session. And, you know, what we wound up with was Zeke the werewolf was in the back of, I want to say, a van. Maybe it was a pickup truck. Something like that. That was being driven by Calvin, and they were chasing after this this Bagheera, this were-tiger, who was on a motorcycle. And so, you know, Calvin was running her down, and then Zeke would jump off and try to carve her up. It was a pretty spectacular finale. It did start leaning... It started getting close to that sort of Street Sharks vibe, but I think that worked for just, like, Zeke and Calvin's relationship with each other, which wound up being, like, the driving force of the whole thing, is that there was all this suspicion amongst the Laughter Factory, oh, who's the traitor? It turned out to be this were-tiger, who is their usual muscle. And, so yeah, there was a whole thing with that, and Veronica, the leader of the Laughter Factory, had a decent relationship with Zeke, but Zeke and Calvin were fantastic together.
Yeah. I don't remember if I had figured out who it was going to be, because they knew that there was a mole. Veronica, it's like, she could have just, it didn't make, because she's the leader of the Laughter Factory, there's these 2 artifacts that the Wreckers, who were the enemy faction, were trying to get. If her goal was to get these artifacts to the Wreckers, she waited for them to be delivered to her and then handed them over. So it didn't make sense that she was the mole.
Yeah.
Calvin had an opportunity to sabotage and didn't. There was an android, I think, named...
Yeah,
I
Oliver.
don't remember what his name was.
Yeah, I just looked all these factions up before we started the recording today, so I know I have all of them on tap. But yeah, Oliver was the name of the android. He wound up being kind of flat and bland. I needed him in there just to have a good number of people in the Laughter Factory. That way, if there were too few, process of elimination like this would have gotten too easy. So, hey, I nailed that.
So I was pretty sure, because Oliver, we also had opportunities, who's alone with me and never did anything. So I was pretty sure it was her. Also, since she was the were-tiger thing, it was like she was the most parallel threat to me, so it would make sense. This is a little out of character, but there's always some out of character interpretation.
I mean, that was my big concern. Like, as I started getting into this plot arc, I realized, like, shit, it's really obvious who the boss fight in this group is, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was out of character pretty sure. Here's So I'm going to ask you a behind-the-scenes question, and then potentially I can do some behind-the-scenes on my side. Did Alicia have a reason for defecting, or was it just because, was it just for the purpose of the plot?
She was a wrecker mole from the beginning.
Okay.
So, like, she was actually... The theme with the wreckers is that their grunts were disposable idiots, which sort of gave you an impression of them as, you know, it was designed... I say you are obviously the audience intended for this, but I'm actually using you in the vague sense in that sentence. The goal was to give you an impression. I don't know if I succeeded. The goal was to give you the impression that the wreckers were sort of dim-witted, short-sighted. I'm looking for a noun to finish all those adjectives off, but the adjectives got the point across, so whatever. But they had a couple of really cunning infiltrators behind them, and so that was one of them. Is that Alicia is just a wrecker. She had always been a wrecker. She joined the Laughter Factory as a double agent for the wreckers, and she's just a lot more subtle and intelligent than their mooks would have the wreckers come off, and that was sort of part of their power, is that because their mooks were such colossal fuck-ups, it meant that the infiltrator elites were harder to, again, I say you in the broad sense. I don't know if this ever actually worked on you specifically, but the goal was that they would be less suspicious, that it would come across like, well, surely these dumbasses can't be all that subtle. But,
Right. That actually, we'll do... There's two brief asides. That is sort of a problem with the game system. The game system has all these different factions, but they were very lightly sketched, so it was very easy for me to impression of what they would be from what Chamomile's impression was. I think we ran into that a couple times.
Yeah. It's that they were so lightly sketched that, yeah. I would flesh them out, and it would turn into something completely different from what Requiem thought they were about, because there were so few details. I had to make up so much stuff that the setting work. It's alarmingly inverse to how World of Darkness proper worked, which is that the mechanics, despite the flaws that we ran into, were still overall a significant upgrade. Things were a lot more consolidated and a lot better thought out. But the setting was a very dull, paint-by-numbers kind of train wreck. Fortunately, it was enough of a sketch that I could flesh things out and make it work. I could fill in good details myself, but it does mean there was almost nothing to go off of, which meant that Requiem had almost no idea what to expect. As a character who was not part of the supernatural conspiracy until the story began, that sort of worked from an in-character perspective, but it did mean that he had almost no idea what to ask for in terms of what factions would turn up, because he had no way of knowing what I thought of these factions, because there's certainly not a whole lot of guidance in the book. Go ahead, sorry.
Because my impression of the Wreckers from the book was that they were entirely infiltrated. So when they showed up as just generic mooks, I'm like, all right, he's the mooks. Like he just picked a faction at random to be the primary antagonist. That was what I was thinking, and that there was just a sort of a token, an occasional token reference to them being infiltrators. Like, and then because like at one point there was a big meeting of the Supernaturals, and the leader of the Wreckers is there, and in my head the Wreckers are completely underground and not cooperating with the mainstream Supernatural factions at all. So that was out of character. I was like, oh, he's doing something very different than what I expected. Which again is not any fault of his. It's just it was how the game was.
Yeah. It's a combination of us not knowing each other well enough, and also in this case just the fact that the setting was such a light outline. Many of the factions in the game, and I did have a fairly expansive list of factions, which was good, but many of them were so poorly fleshed out that there's almost nothing there to go on, and I basically just had to invent them from scratch.
Yeah, like, unlike World of Darkness, which the main advantage of this setting over World of Darkness is not really anything offensive, or that a lot of it could also then be very dull. Oh god, what is she going to show us?
Hopefully the Ankaran sarcophagus.
We can briefly talk about what's actually going on in Bloodlines. Is there's nothing like the Giovanni weird, it's racist caricature of Italians.
Right. Like this system, for all it didn't have a lot of the advantages that World of Darkness did. I had to make the setting from scratch. I happen to be really good at that, so I mean, I want to be clear here. I didn't literally have to make the entire setting from scratch, but I had to do a lot of work building this setting myself. I happen to be very good at that, but it's definitely Old World of Darkness out of the box has a fantastic setting to use. Granted, there are some egregious flaws like the Quajin and the Giovanni in it, but there's a lot in there to use. Like the Camarilla and the Anarchs are really good. The Sabbat is almost really good. There's a lot of elements in World of Darkness that you can reassemble into something amazing, and that will feel like the World of Darkness.
That's like another issue was, so I had to pick one of these sub-factions to join from the start, and I didn't know how Chamomile was going to run the sub-faction, and I picked the Church of Set, just because it seemed, like the aesthetic seemed kind of like pseudo-Satanist, which seemed to fit Zeke's aesthetic. 2, each sub-faction has a special power they can teach you, and their special power seemed like it would work for his build mechanically. And 3, in my head he was going to go down Darkness eventually, even though if it wasn't super fast, and so when he ended up not going down that road, it ended up sort of clashing with him being part of this, the Church of Set, which was an issue.
Yeah.
I like the idea. Were you going to say something?
Well, just that, I'm going to have to kill these things, aren't I? Fine. But yeah, the Church of Set, it's a thing where had I planned this out for a month, there would have been a point where I would have sat down and used the Church of Set to, it's like, oh, hey, fantastic. Here is a faction whose whole thing is convincing people to fall deeper into darkness. They are, in that sense, a little bit like what the Sabbat should have been, where they're all about embracing your monstrous side, but not necessarily about, immediately disregarding the masquerade in a way that would demolish the setting instantly. So it's like, oh, hey, this is fantastic. Here is a faction who will actually sit down and plan out the character arc of Zeke falling to darkness, which means I can justify a lot of artifice from them in that arc. And so, I'm like, okay, this is amazing. But unfortunately, I never really had time to sit down and plan that out more than one step ahead, which they did a good job of ingratiating themselves to him, but they never really had an opportunity to spring their trap because I had painted myself in a corner and so...
And part of it was, he was already partially on the road, so, some of the temptations you would have used, you couldn't use because he already does that stuff.
He introduces him to this... Yeah, he introduces Zeke to Alistair, was the name of the leader of the Church of Set. He introduces Zeke to Gabriel, who is this supernatural drug fiend. He is high on, ghost meth, basically. And the problem is, he's this clearly unhinged, erratic, he's addicted to his own stuff, and he also has these addicts that he keeps on hand that, you know, he can rely on to do anything to continue their supply. They're not, you know, rely is perhaps the wrong word, but, you know, they're unreliable but committed in a weird sort of way, you know, in the way that people in a crack house often are. And I have no idea how to get out of this place. Is that stairs? That is not stairs. But yeah,
I'm sure there's a switch or something, right?
Yeah, I can probably pull on one of these. Oh no, there's a secret door. Fantastic. But yeah, the problem was that Zeke was, you know, kind of like, I figured from the start that Zeke is probably doing marijuana or whatever, but apparently he's doesn't have a huge issue with upgrading to ghost meth.
I kind of feel like that was a mistake on my part, that he probably should have been like, no, but like I was going back and forth on it, and like I probably should have had him say no in retrospect, like, but it wasn't, I don't remember my exact thinking, but I remember doing it and then being like, no, I don't think it would have been that yet. Like, he certainly would be willing to go along the line of drugs, but probably like, because it wasn't super clear like how serious this drug was that he's being offered. But even though Zeke's pretty impulsive, it's like, this could be ghost meth. Like, probably should say no.
Right.
That's one of those things where I should have been like, no, that was the... I should have... Because I immediately was like, no, that was not the right... That was not the correct in-character decision. We also have, like, he's already fine with doing crime, for the most part, so...
Right. Simply breaking the law at all was not going to be a threshold for him to cross.
Like... In my head, like, and this would have been an intersection of two things, especially when I found out when he interacted with, oh, you're out of blood.
I am. I have blood packs. I should eat one.
Thankfully,
So
nothing down here is alive. Does the odious chalice have anything in it?
Oh, that's a good question. I've been killing lots of stuff. Oh man, I've got a bunch.
Points.
Yeah, that'll fill me up.
So, especially when I found out that the lead Alaster was a Bali, and his splat has a spell called Learn the Heart's Pain, which allows you to get sort of intimate details about a person's life. It's like, okay, so these people can figure out with magic and probably with just sort of like maybe internet history hacking that Zeke is gay and try to tempt him that way. Like, hey, we're the Church of Set. What would you think about having a football players or something? Like, that would have been a temptation. But
there was an angle that I set myself up for but was never confident in actually executing, in that there was a male vampire in the group who obviously vampires are the sexiest monsters, so but which again, you know, kind of designing blind, like you know, yeah, I personally think vampires are the sexiest monsters, but it's also a common opinion, right? Like, being honest, that is basically me saying that Charmander is the best starter in Pokemon. Like, it is both my genuine opinion and also, I realize, a sign that I am, like, the most basic of bitches in that regard. Like, fair enough, sometimes the popular thing is popular because lots of people like it. So statistically speaking, sometimes that also applies to me.
So Antonio
and
was
so yeah,
supposed to be something?
Like, yeah, like, I was never really certain what to do with that, but it was a thread that I left myself that I could try and work with. But nothing ever came of it, because... And yeah, it was... Antonio was a little bit too refined, I think, for Zeke's wild child style.
Yeah. Well, and that was something I was going to mention earlier, but we kind of got talking about other stuff. Every time male character got introduced, I would be like, now is this a character that I could be romancing? Like, is this a romance opportunity? And I could never like figure out like how I would even approach it, or like if that was even your intent with the character. And also because I didn't really know how any of the characters looked, the descriptions were pretty sparse, so I didn't really have an idea of like.
And that has always been my greatest weakness as a writer, is that I tend to underdescribe things.
And for this game, I think the solution for that probably would have been just find a picture off Pinterest. But
yeah, so because like, it's funny you should mention, almost every male character introduced was like, if not initially intended as romanceable, was certainly something where it's like, if he bites on this, I'm gonna run with it.
Oh my god!
Is that?
This is making me. I wish. I hope you like get are able to close a game soon. Because it's like not only because I not only with a romance is often, but also like have options presented to me. But we also have the issue where Zeke was in the closet and not really willing to necessarily make the first move.
Right.
And I kind of expected, especially with the Church of Set, I expected to do that to him, because if they're pulling you towards things you don't want to do publicly.
Yeah, I mean, and that is, that's one of the threads that I left myself, but it was sort of like, romance isn't my strong point in the first place, and so I was just kind of like, that's why I was nervous about trying to push something, because, if that went wrong, it could go very wrong, especially early on. It was, again, you didn't know me very well, and I was aware you didn't know me very well, so if I tried to push something and botched it up, it could come across as creepy and possibly even like bigoted and othering. So I was really nervous about getting it wrong, which made me pretty timid in trying to push that angle.
Well, we also had the thing where, even though that is something I wanted, I'm also committed to playing my character. And that happened with the power fantasy thing. Like, when it happened faster than I felt Zeke was gonna do, even though that's what I had wanted for the game, was like, well, Zeke's not ready for this, so I'm not gonna go in on it. So even though I wanted the romance, Zeke wasn't ready for it, so I wasn't gonna go in. Though, funnily enough, so there was this werewolf character at the very end, the like very final couple of sessions, Brandon, I think, who had sided with, against his werewolf pack, had sided with Zeke's faction in this sort of inter-supernatural strife that was happening, and they team up, and I said to myself, like, I want something, like, you know what? We're really heading towards the end. After this gets done, I'm going to have Zeke just ask Brandon out, and we'll see if anything happens. What happened to Brandon? Chamomile.
What happened to, I mean...
Do you remember?
I do. But it was the dice's fault, not mine. Which I'm pretty sure Brandon is the one who bled out and died after the fight with the sheriff, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, yeah.
Alright, bye. So, the very last, not very last, but like the last, like, I guess arc, essentially, there's a supernatural war going on, and gone in
brief aside, answer number 3 on this is perfect. Please continue, though.
So the supernatural war is finally happening. He's chosen a werewolf tribe, or pack, I guess, that has been on the outskirts that he was not able to convince to join, but one of the werewolves ended up coming and joining with them, because the faction they're part of is pretty loose with rules. They're sort of the equivalent of the anarchs.
Right.
So you can do that and not get in trouble. Is it going to be distracting for me to talking when you're fighting these two? Because it seems like
they are a bit of a problem.
You are... Did you save?
Hang on, it's fine. These guys are melee foes and fairly slow. So as long as I don't get too sloppy. Problem is I am kind of out of high power weapons. But I can wear them down with my Glock just as long as I keep them at a distance, heal regularly, and soak them for blood whenever I start to run low. I've also got some blood packs I can... Okay, that is cheating. But yeah, I may zone out for a bit while I'm fighting these guys, but go ahead and continue your summary of the plot here. This is after Mr. Spooky had been killed, which, it's again, Mr. Spooky should have been the final confrontation, but again, I was planning things out 1 week at a time, which is not where I do my best work. So,
because what should have happened is, to draw out Mr. Spooky's arc a little, is Mr. Spooky should have ended up killing the Prince of Houston and declaring like a blood hunt on the Church of Set.
Right.
And that would have made him the final confrontation.
The Prince of Houston, which, again, Zeke had the perfect names for these guys. It was the King of Texas.
Even when they were, like, very clearly dangerous, Zeke would refuse to take any of this seriously.
Which was fantastic. Like, it meant that I could play these characters, like, really... Like, they're taking themselves very seriously. They're being, you know, very morbid and threatening. And Zeke's flat-out refusal to take any of them seriously. Just... It was such an amazing contrast. I loved it so much. Okay, where are you guys? Again with the teleporting.
But, so they're going into this final confrontation. There's, like, there's a bunch of moving parts for doing stuff. Zeke is paired with Brandon and essentially a witch. I don't remember exactly what their goal was, but they go off to do it, and they end up fighting the sheriff, who was super powerful. I think he must have had, like, elder potence or something.
Yeah, he had 1 or 2 elder powers, which, for reference, is a level of power that is... The book doesn't even tell you how players are supposed to get access to it, although it does make a vague gesture that they probably should be able to. But, so,
and we're about
it's
to
not
get
something...
I'm going to run into... At some point, I'm going to discuss one of the issues with the book's description of... Because I felt like that was a major issue with what happened. So we go and I think our goal must have been to fight the sheriff. Either just...
Damn it.
Dang. Well, hopefully you saved.
I mean, honestly, my problem here is that I forgot to buy up a bunch of bullets, so...
Are we able to turn back?
We are.
Should we?
Yeah.
Should I continue talking while we do that, or is there going to be a
Yes. This may end up being... I mean, it's already going to be 2 episodes. It may end up being a pair of bumper episodes, but that'll be fine. We've got a lot to talk about here, and I think a lot of it is at least reasonably interesting. I realize this is,
pretty interesting.
Like, I realize this is all on the self-indulgent side, but I do think we're doing a pretty good job of describing, it's a post-mortem more than just a retelling. which
Yeah.
we'll see in the supercut how much of this, because I'm usually pretty good at figuring out what parts are actually good and which parts only seemed like they were fun at the time in the aftermath. So we'll see which parts of this I keep in the supercut. But I feel good about it right now. So yeah, let's keep going.
Well, since you're not fighting the Blood Brothers, you'll be able to comment a little better. So I think the goal might have just been to fight the sheriff. So the sheriff comes out, and the problem
it might have been, there was definitely a lot of muscle in that group, so I think it might have been.
I made this was a personal mistake, and I made this mistake twice. I should have used all of my power points to buff immediately instead of... But I was like, I'm a little worried that, like, I don't know if this is going to be the final fight, if I'm going to the power points later. So I held a little bit in reserve, and I should have just gone all in at once. But part of it was just the dice fucking me over, and then part of it was also, there was a part of the rules that was not well written, not and ended up, I would have been able to fix. So
yeah, this was a game that didn't receive very much playtesting at all, and it showed. Like,
so what happened
we were basically the playtest group for this, and we weren't even in communication with the creator.
Yeah.
Like, but I do think we possibly gave this a more thorough test run than anyone else. Like, it's not a very... Like, it's definitely... It has its fans, but I don't know how many of those fans were able to actually get a campaign going. So...
Yeah. So, we fight the sheriff, we get our asses handed to us, partially because I may have tampered with the forces of fate and been cursed by Fortuna, so I was rolling very badly. So it gets to the point where, like, we're clearly not going to be able to win. Now, what I did not realize, so there's this thing in the game called Edge, and you can spend Edge to do certain effects. One of the things you could spend Edge to do is you can actually when you do a dice roll, you can re-roll all of them. I thought that all Edge could do with a dice roll is add 3 successes, so that I could have one of these bad rolls where I would have been able to finish him off had I rolled well. I could have spent Edge and probably finished him off with a re-roll, but I didn't know that Edge could even do that. At one point, like, because like at one point, like, we've basically lost, and like think like the sheriff like hits me and like has killed me. And I'm like, well, I guess that's game over. And Cam's like, you can re-roll at a point of Edge. You can re-roll all your losses. I did not know you could do that because it was not clearly spelled out in the rules.
Which, yeah.
So, like, had that been spelled out, I probably would have been a lot more fight, because I would have just re-rolled one of my attacks and killed the sheriff. But the other thing that was, like, it was like, I don't want Cam to feel like I'm being super critical of him, but like...
Oh my god, can I not leave?
Are we stuck?
We may be stuck here until we finish.
Is there any way to buy guns in the Giovanni?
I mean, sort of.
Or would you just restart?
Yeah, I'm just going to load an earlier save from...
Okay.
Before
Should I keep going?
Yeah, go ahead, keep going. I'm going to blitz through this conversation.
So, because, like, it was frustrating to me because I kept thinking of ways that after we did it, I kept thinking that, like, Zeke very easily could have, like, at least saved Brandon, like, because, like, as I'm running away from, what turns out is Zeke can very easily he is, like, in werewolf form, I've got, like, 6 or 7 dexterity, I've got 6 athletics, and I've got run as a specialization. I can very easily outrun the sheriff. So what I should have done is once the...
By the way, this is on the same basic scale as World of Darkness, which means 6 or 7 dexterity is, in fact, busting the cap on that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's... You basically have to be a werewolf or something like that to even get there.
so what I should have done once it was clear we weren't going to beat the sheriff is I should have had Brandon turn back human, and then I could have grabbed him and the witch and just let the sheriff eat my dust. Or there was some spells that I could have learned. Like, I wasn't sure if they were going to be good or not. I had the ability fence about whether they would be worth it or not, where I could have actually used my very high charisma as a spellcasting effect and targeted the sheriff's one of the sheriff's mental defenses, which might have been lower. I don't know, because I could have learned like Flames of Panic. But we were getting to the end. I'm like, is this even going to be worth it, or should I just put it in attributes? So I think I just put it in attributes. So it was like afterwards,
he definitely
I was so
had
frustrated with myself.
Like his mental defenses weren't low, but they were a lot lower compared to his physical defenses. So like he was pretty well rounded,
Right.
like but he still had strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. So I ended up feeling so frustrated with myself afterwards. It's like after Brandon died, I was like, there were so many things I could have done as a player to make that come out in my favor, and I somehow messed them all up. Which one of them, because I feel like the edge thing was not my fault. That was a factor of the rules not being super opaque, not being super
Right.
clear about what stuff did. But it was a little frustrating. Because at that point I decided, like, after we do this, I'm going to have Zeke ask Brandon out. And of course, so naturally...
Yeah. Especially because like practically every male character in the whole thing, except for Zeke's brother, that was like the only one where I was, and his father, I guess. Not that he appeared very often, but like, yeah, outside of direct blood relatives, it was basically any male character. If Zeke shows a clear interest, then it's like, aha, then I know, or at least I have an idea of what attributes are, are that Zeke is into, and then I can start building around that. So basically, any male character that he shows interest in, I've got to follow that.
I wasn't even necessarily that Brandon was the type Zeke would have been interested in. It's just like we were clearly at the end game, and I wanted him. But also, I was never certain like whether any of the characters options things to feel like I'm playing a game with a heterosexual man. I don't want him to feel weird at any point. So I figured I'll just let him give me the indication. And also, because Zeke is still in the closet, I'll let Zeke and look forward to an romance. But then it got towards the end of like, oh, that's not going to happen, is it? If I want that to happen, I need to do it myself.
So yeah.
Vomit up blood?
Yeah, because that's the only vomit animation they have. So
Okay.
she's supposed to be really drunk, and so you can convince the guy to take her home so that she doesn't embarrass him, and then you can steal their invitations and get inside. But the only vomiting animation they have is for vomiting up blood. So
now I'm just like, I could have romanced any of them.
yeah, no, and it's we're both kicking ourselves over the things that we missed out on because for whatever reason neither of us ever thought to sit down and have a fucking conversation together.
Even like when you introduce Oliver, like part of the whole in the game, androids have the whole doomed drone.
Yeah,
He got described as sort of being like having supermodel looks. And like,
he's like this
is this my
perfect, immaculately beautiful thing. And that was sort of like a thing that I dangled in. I'm like, okay, if he takes this bait, then then I'm gonna follow that. And it was, he had an intentionally vague description where it's just like, what does he look like? A sexy man.
You hadn't hired me as your man sexiness.
Right, yeah, I didn't have any man sexiness consultants at the time. It was a huge issue.
Just a gigantic drag on you that you could not get a man sex consultant.
It's a very underserved industry. Like, we're half joking, but seriously, getting illustrators to draw a sexy woman, no problem. Getting illustrators to draw a sexy man, huge issue. tons of
It's
effort.
weird. It doesn't seem like it should be that hard. Like,
Yeah, I mean, like there's plenty of straight women drawing in general. I don't know where they all go when I need an illustration commissioned.
well, and even when I've tried to help him find some and not been able to find them.
It's like there are people who just wouldn't return my emails, which I assume they're not interested. So fair enough, but it's weird that all of them were not interested. It's like, is it something I said? Like, and I sent him and I don't have it off the top of my head, but like, I sent him, it was a fairly boilerplate business. Hey, I need some illustrations drawn for a project I'm working on. This would be for commercial use. Are you available to do a commission? Like, very bland kind of, like, I have money, you can draw, let's work something out. But, yeah, we already saw this once. Hurry it up.
I think part of it was I felt like the closet issue needed to be resolved before a romance happened. And then also,
yeah,
I was worried about like making you uncomfortable because heterosexual man.
Yeah, I mean, for the record, I am almost impossible to make uncomfortable. I've actually since added a little thing to my FAQ, not entirely because of this. Like, I did sort of have in the back of my head this whole campaign, but there were a number of other campaigns where it was basically like, hey, by the way, I am extremely difficult to creep out or unnerve. So, like, if you have like some weird sex thing, then just tell me about it. That you want in the campaign. Like, that's okay. Like, be as explicit as you want. I will be at worst a little bit bored. And, jobs are boring sometimes. I will still pay attention if you're paying me.
There's part of it like,
Embalm
I didn't
them, I
know
assume.
you, and like,
Right,
some
yeah.
heterosexual men do get weird about this.
It's, yeah. Like, I'm definitely familiar with that reaction. I find it baffling. Like, absent some kind of actual, like, abuse, I find it odd, the idea that whatever kind of sex someone is having that I don't want to have, like, that doesn't strike me as any more boring than football. Where, like, yeah, I'm not really into that. That's not my thing, but I'm not disgusted by people who play football or who like football or whatever. Like, this is fine. Can I just go through this door? No, it is locked. Okay, so let me use my shitty bullets on these guys. Or hey, no, you know what? Why am I using bullets at all? I know how to kill these things. I'm attacking them with katanas. This seems very straightforward to me.
One of the other mechanical weirdness that we ran into. Like I mentioned that charisma in this game did not really.
Yeah, shockingly unhelpful for social interaction.
Cause like, I wanted Zeke to be like a charmer. Essentially, the way I thought it worked was that there's two ways to ways it can be like logically convincing somebody, and you like some people are just charming. And I was like, well, Zeke's not going to be like sitting down explaining somebody to persuade him. He's the type who's just going to like flash a smile, and people are going to want to help him out because he's funny. So naturally, I put points in charisma, but charisma is basically useless.
I think the social mechanics were written the way the author wanted them to work, like things they should work, rather than anything that accurately reflects, real life. Because like there are totally people who can, who are able to get what they want largely just by flashing a smile. That happens all the time. Like, that is probably the single most effective way to persuade people. Is that people will do things for their friends that they wouldn't do for other people, including things that are very obviously corrupt. And so if you can convince people that you're friends real quick, then you're good.
Yeah.
Like, that is the secret.
And that would have been very in character with Zeke.
Right.
But he couldn't actually do that because charisma is useless.
Yeah, because logical persuasion is the only way to convince anyone of anything.
And, like, charisma wasn't even super great for magic. Like, logic could be used as a stat for a bunch of magic, and charisma didn't really have the same, wasn't super useful for magic. So I'd accidentally dumped a bunch of attribute points in a useless attribute. The other thing was backgrounds, and this wasn't like an active impediment, but it was just something in the game that didn't really do anything. You have this thing called background skills, which is stuff like, oh, I know a lot about comics, or oh, I'm from Houston and I know stuff about Houston. And like, it did give, like, in the process of coming up with some backgrounds, it did give some like interesting quirks to Zeke's personality. Like, he was kind of a conspiracy theorist, like talking about like Alex Jones and David Icke, stuff like, and he was big into like horror movies. So it did add an interesting, like, some interesting background details. But in practice, the only background skill I think he ever used was Houston area.
Yeah. Like, so he has a, he likes conspiracy theories a lot. That's a fun role-playing prompt, but when does that come up as a skill that you roll? Like, barring a campaign specifically designed around conspiracy theories, which this one was not, like, why would you even... Yeah, and this is the problem, the general problem with background skills, is that they seem to have been added without any, or at least without much thought put into how they would be used, or failing that without any of those thoughts having been written down into the rules. God damn it.
Like,
there we go.
the only thing, like, again, this would have had to require charisma a useful stat, being able to roll like charisma plus conspiracy theories as a way to like persuade people of something. Just like, here, I'm talking about this in a way that's interesting and it makes me more likable, and then when I bring up this thing at the end that I want you to do or tell me about, you're more willing to do it. But that's not really how the rules worked.
And there's also something that we talked about on Discord long after the campaign was over, but you could have backgrounds that are left ambiguous, and then you can fill them in as you go. So, when Zeke meets Calvin, he could just he could have some free-floating backgrounds that he could then assign to something that has overlap with Calvin, and that way he and Calvin have something to talk about. So then he could roll, charisma plus 80 Schwarzenegger movies or whatever it is, whatever Calvin's interests were. Honestly, many of the NPCs did not even have backgrounds. I forget if Calvin was an exception, but like, I found them to be useless. But yeah.
The only reason I said it was because you had told me it came up a couple times. He dressed like he was walked out of the '80s, so I was like, '80s culture.
Is that because I love Calvin as a character just because he still sees himself as a 20-something, but because from the moment that the bugs ate the original Calvin and started wearing his skin as a suit, he stopped aging because they can preserve the skin. It wouldn't be very helpful if they couldn't. And since the bug swarm is itself capable of self-replicating, he's basically biologically immortal. So he still looks like he's like, 25-ish years old, but he's looked that way for, the past 40 years.
How did you imagine Calvin looking physically?
I imagined him as kind of short, narrow-faced, kind of skinny and brown-haired. He looked very wiry and unassuming, I felt like. And then, if I'm bad at description and writing, I'm only worse at it in, trying to speak off the cuff. Yeah, how do you picture Calvin?
I always imagine him having a leather jacket, but like kind of like not like a biker type leather jacket, but like a more like the type that somebody on like a really expensive motorcycle, like with like a little bit of red. It's a little more high end than like traditional like Hell's Angels type.
Right.
Not necessarily like wiry, but like kind of with like a sneer on his face most of the time. That was probably just from his interactions because they hated each other. I
backed me into a corner. It's fine. I saved right before the fight.
It's fine. It's fine. Everything is fine. You should spend some edge.
What's the hotkey for that?
F is pay respects. Also, for whatever reason, I imagine slicked back blonde hair for some reason, like pretty like poofy, but also like you could put some some gel in it to like style it. Kind of like a pointy nose, like not a giant nose, but like pretty pointy. Based on your description, I now have a new image. And
I mean, I definitely think you got the clothes pretty much spot on. Because, his he was supposed to look like he was, he had basically figured out his style in the 80s and then mainly updated it to, take advantage of new material science in the meantime, but not really to change the aesthetic at all.
But
which, so that sort of high-end biker look definitely suited God damn it, every time they back me into a corner. How do I explode them? Okay, now you know what? Let's try the Uzi. Oh, and I've got plenty of blood. Let's also turn on the shield. Yeah, Uzi's not that great. Not for these guys, at least.
are like ghosts shooting out at you? What's happening?
Something like that. I have no idea what exactly they're supposed to be, but it is some kind of humanoid figure that they are launching at me as a projectile.
So now, having had this conversation, I'm starting to wonder if Zalvin would have been a good thing to happen.
I mean, I was willing to give it a shot.
They did hit it off.
They were really good friends. I'm not sure if they would have been good in a romantic context, but I definitely would have been willing to try. Like, and Calvin was one of those characters who had like yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is that they don't have that complimentary aspect that you get out of romantic couples. Although I'm not good at romance, so you know, what do I know?
Yeah.
But yeah, Calvin had like, you know, a very functional place in the plot, and then he just happened to click really well with Zeke.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was one of those, you know, he wasn't one of those ones where, you know, I was kind of putting out feelers and seeing if he bit down on anything, but it was one of those ones, like literally every other male character, it was kind of like, if it happens to work, then great. Because, you know, I don't have a goddamn clue how this shit works, so if I stumble into success, then I am going to not be so stupid as to ignore it because it wasn't one of the ones I was planning on.
Yeah, I don't think... Probably Zalvin would not have worked, and also we would have needed a much better ship name.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know if they invented it, but definitely Ruby is the earliest fandom I have heard of using it. The ship names that are actually, like, fun little code names and not just two words smashed together. Like, I'm trying to think of a ship name for them. Hell on Wheels would probably be better for the Alistair Calvin ship, which is a weird ship to go after, but I've seen weirder, so you know. Come on, man. Don't you want to pop out and try to slice my face off? And here's the sarcophagus. Ah, there you are.
Alright, so are we going to romance the mummy on the topic of romance? Found the...
We have found the sarcophagus. I don't know if we have the key.
You keep promising me mummy romances.
I mean, look, man, we've got the sarcophagus now. It is in our grasp. There's no letting it get stolen this time.
By the way, when did you start levitating? You appear to be driving the car without touching the wheel.
Yes, but that one's actually... Like, I've been driving the car while playing a video game for several weeks now. And does Becca not want to talk to me yet? Okay, I guess I gotta go talk to LaCroix first. I mean, obviously.
Is there anything else we should mention about After Sundown, or do you think we've gone through it all at this point?
I think that's about it. There were a lot of very good moments. I mean, Zeke's final confrontation with Mr. Spooky was really good. It would have done really well interwoven. It would have done even better interwoven with a coming out of the closet arc that I unfortunately never really found a hook to get rolling with. Which, again, had I sat down and actually talked to you, I would have found plenty of material to work with. But I was a little babby GM, or at least a babby professional at the time, and did not realize that, hey, maybe just ask your players what they want instead of trying to stun them by producing it from thin air. Like, it is cool when I can do that, but it is hardly a thing I can do reliably on account of not being psychic. But yeah, we are going to open the sarcophagus and romance the mummy.
What?
God damn it, Beckett. I'm trying to sell Requiem on this game. This game that he has already played.
It was funny after this After Sundown game. I didn't play a Kingmaker game with Chamomile, and he also put that character through the ringer. And at one point, I went to Chamomile. Like sometimes it seems like specifically. And as I recall, you said, "Well, that's because you make characters pain."
Yeah, you make characters who have like wants and desires, like characters who are capable of feeling pain at something other than the loss of magic items. So, like most people make characters who don't really suffer anything unless it is a game mechanical setback. So, high explosives. I know they are vulnerable to astrolite. Oh my god, I can actually. I'm so glad that that's actually an option.
Amazing. Okay. Sure, where do I get some?
All right, now we're getting somewhere.
And he's a vampire. And he's romanceable. Like, we keep playing these games that don't have romance. We didn't have a romance in Kingdom Hearts. We didn't have a romance. I guess there were a bunch of romances in Monster Prom, but I feel, didn't you fail all of them?
I feel like my romance with Dragonheat should count for something. So I get what you're going through with this whole Sherlock scan thing, but I'm not really buying it. And I'm gonna bite down on the hook and drag them into the. I think he was working on his own.
Oh. Was he like, is that from the actual World of Darkness?
I don't know, and I don't think so. Which other deity would it be, given they're operating out of a monastery?
Don't act like... I mean, Contro's just gonna go in there and shoot them all, so...
I once again need to ask him all of the questions so that I can soak him for superpowers. Ah, there's the option I'm looking for.
I'm looking for somebody for my D&D game. Oh, can we seduce him?
We cannot. Although, if we do take option number 2, we get, like, a seduction-related bonus. Take number 1, we get a scholarship bonus. 3 gives us stealth. 4, I think, gives us a melee combat thing. We might try to seduce him anyway, just on the grounds that that might be the most useful benefit we can get out of this. We might grab some stealth.
What Kotula would say, which would actually character say, look, I'm looking for somebody for my D&D game who is going to play something other than a wizard. I feel like all Gingles play druids. Would you want to join the game?
Or rangers.
I feel like Beckett's more of a druid type.
Yeah, Beckett would be it. Although, no, you know what? He's going to say that he's always preferred wizards.
Damn it. We're never going to get this game together.
I think 4 is the most honest answer.
It's called werewolf. Unless you've got further questions, I'd really like to get back to looking at the sarcophagus. Remember, Dr. Johansson is an innocent. He has no idea we actually exist. Try not to put the idea in his head.
Did you find a way to open the sarcophagus? I understand. I'm sure you'll find this a suitable recompense.
I don't think we want LaCroix in our D&D group.
I mean, I don't think he would say yes if we asked, but if he did, we would still say no, which would be a weird thing. Like, hey, do you want to join our D&D group? Actually, yes. Well, too bad.
Out of the NPCs, who would we recruit for a balanced party? So we already have Coachella playing a wizard. Beckett would probably also play a wizard, so we can't have him in the party.
And Strauss would also be a wizard, so... we might be able to convince Nines to play like a rogue or a barbarian or something.
Yeah, so Nines.
Okay, so Nines is a rogue, and possibly Damsel as a rogue. I'm trying to figure out who the most roguish Anarch would be. But then Smiling Jack is probably the barbarian.
So we just need one more
Actually,
character.
We might be able to get Nines to play a paladin.
So we get Nines as a paladin. We get... So we're basically doing an Anarch's D&D game. Oh, Heather would play, she would be whatever class we...
It's true.
If we needed her. Heather, like, hey, you're playing a Clerk Heal bot. She'd be like, yes, I would love that.
See, this is the benefit of having ghouls.
They play the D&D classes nobody else wants to play.
We could also get Heather to GM for us. Like, you know, we can just dump the rule books in her lap and say, hey, be ready to run a session of this next Saturday.
So we still, but then we need another player. Who we're going to have the player? We need one more player. Don't we?
No, actually, I do need your blood. But yeah, she does not have anything new to sell us after the Giovanni incident. So, I mean, if we've got Nines and Jack... So yeah, we've got Nines, we've got Jack, and then we've got Cotula. So strictly speaking, that's 3 players. That could be enough.
That hacker Nosferatu would probably play, but I don't know what class he would play. Probably a rogue, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he feels like he would be broadly into D&D. We might be able to convince him to play just whatever class was necessary, right?
Like everybody in the Chantry plays D&D and is willing to play, but they will only play wizard, so it never works.
So now we just have to save a professor from the Society of Leopold so that he can tell us how to romance the mummy.